It was just another summer fair in Nova Scotia. The air smelled like cotton candy and fried dough, and the distant sound of laughter mixed with carnival music. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Families came to unwind, children ran from ride to ride, and memories were made under the glow of string lights and Ferris wheels. But for the Wexley family, that evening would become a memory frozen in time for all the wrong reasons. On June 18, 2004, 70-year-old Clara Wexley disappeared from the county harvest fair in Truro. One moment she was holding her mother's hand, smiling up at a balloon vendor, and the next, she was gone. No scream, no sound, no clue, just gone. Her hand had slipped away, and with it, their world. The search began instantly. Volunteers, police, neighbors, all combed the fairgrounds within minutes. They checked every booth, ride, and restroom. They shut the gates. Announcements were made. But Clara had vanished, as if she'd never been there at all. In the days that followed, her face was everywhere on lampposts, news channels, milk cartons. A school photo of a bright-eyed girl in a yellow dress became a haunting symbol of loss for an entire community. Despite extensive efforts and nationwide coverage, no solid leads ever surfaced. The case remained open, but cold. Her parents, Martha and Paul Wexley, refused to move away. "We can't leave if there's a chance she'll come back," Martha said in a rare interview. "What if she walks through that door one day?" For 20 years, they waited. Birthdays came and went with candles unblown. Christmases passed with a stocking always hung for Clara. Her room remained untouched, a shrine to the daughter they could never stop looking for. And then, in the spring of 2024, just as the Wexleys were preparing for the painful 20th anniversary of her disappearance, something impossible happened. A flyer arrived in the mailbox of St. Luke's Church, tucked between community announcements and a call for volunteers. It was a printed pamphlet for a women's retreat happening in British Columbia. Nothing unusual except for the photo on the front. A close-up portrait of a woman in her 20s. Clear, striking hazel eyes. Calm expression. The church secretary glanced at the photo and froze. She had seen those eyes before, not recently, but long ago, a missing child poster that once hung by the church doors. She quietly took the flyer to her office, pulled out her phone, and searched online for Clara Wexley, missing girl. Side by side, two faces stared back at her, one from 2004, the other from a 2024 church flyer. The resemblance was chilling. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she never thought she'd need. The local RCMP cold case unit. Something was about to change. After 2 decades of silence, Clara's story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The morning of June 18, 2004. It started like any other summer day in the quiet town of Truro, Nova Scotia. The sun was bright and the smell of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air. It was the last day of school for Clara Wexley, a bubbly 7-year-old who loved dogs, strawberry yogurt, and her favorite red sneakers. Her parents, Martha and Paul, had promised her a trip to the county harvest fair to celebrate the end of the school year. Clara was so excited, she barely touched her breakfast. She rushed to put on her yellow sundress, the one with tiny flowers, and braided her hair the way her mom taught her. That afternoon, they arrived at the fairgrounds. The place was alive with noise and color game booths, carousel rides, and crowds of families enjoying the start of summer. Clara held tight to her cotton candy and even tighter to her mother's hand. They visited the petting zoo. She fed a goat, laughed when a bunny tickled her palm. Then they stopped near the balloon vendor by the tilt-a-whirl. That's when everything unraveled. Martha remembers loosening her grip for just a moment to pay for a balloon Clara had pointed at. When she turned back, her daughter was gone. At first, she didn't panic. Clara had probably wandered just a few steps away. Maybe to look at the carousel, maybe to pet another animal. But 5 minutes turned to 10, then 15. Paul joined the search. They split up, asking everyone: ride operators, snack vendors, even other children. The fair organizers were notified. Security swept the grounds. A PA announcement crackled overhead. "Attention guests, we are looking for a missing child named Clara." By sunset, the police had arrived. The fair remained open but tense. Officers with flashlights moved through the crowd. Helicopters hovered above. The surrounding woods were searched. Ditches, drains, and abandoned stalls were checked. Nothing. There were no witnesses, no screams. No one had seen her being pulled away. No child was found crying. It was as if Clara had evaporated into the warm June air. That night, Martha sat on a bench near the balloon stand, staring at the ground. Paul stood nearby, silent. The fair lights flickered in the background, now mocking instead of magical. Detectives canvassed every corner of the grounds. Dogs were brought in but picked up no scent past a certain gravel path near the edge of the property. That path led into a wooded area, but no trace of Clara was found there either. The town of Truro mobilized instantly. Flyers were printed overnight. Local media covered the story. Volunteers showed up by the dozens, forming search parties. Strangers left food, flashlights, and supplies on the Wexleys' porch. For a time, it felt like the whole town had stopped breathing, but as days turned into weeks, the hope began to fade. Police had no suspects, no clues, no leads, and Martha began sleeping in Clara's room, just in case. She came home in the middle of the night. Morning news anchors in Halifax interrupted regular programming to cover the story. Photos of the bright-eyed girl in a yellow dress now flashed across every screen in the province, missing without a trace. The headlines read, and people across Canada began to ask, how does a child vanish in broad daylight at a family fair? The RCMP escalated the case quickly. It was no longer just a local investigation. Provincial task forces joined the effort, and a special missing persons unit was brought in. They set up a command center in Truro, just blocks from the fairgrounds. Tips started pouring in dozens a day at first. Some claimed to have seen a girl matching Clara's description on a nearby highway. Others mentioned an unfamiliar van parked behind the fairgrounds that day. One person even swore she saw Clara near a motel 2 towns over. All of them were investigated. None of them led anywhere. The fairground was shut down for several days as forensic teams combed every inch. Dirt samples were collected, shoe prints photographed. Garbage bins were emptied and sifted. Surveillance footage from vendor booths was reviewed frame by frame. But the carnival atmosphere had worked against the investigation to many people. Too much movement, too little documentation. The Wexleys went from hopeful to hollow. Martha stopped eating. Paul quit work indefinitely. Their house became a makeshift office of sorts, filled with case files, newspaper clippings, and maps dotted with pushpins. A reward was offered $25,000 for any credible information. Then it was raised to $50,000. Still nothing. News programs began bringing in experts, former detectives, psychologists, even criminal profilers. Some believed Clara had been abducted by someone she knew. Others said it was likely the act of a stranger who had been watching and waiting. One theory, darker than the rest, suggested that she had been taken for trafficking. Though police never confirmed or denied that lead, people started to whisper. Some pointed fingers. A rumor even circulated that the parents might have been involved, though police quickly dismissed it as baseless and harmful. We have no reason to believe Martha or Paul Wexley were anything but devastated parents, said Inspector Graham at a press conference. But as the media frenzy grew, so did the pressure and the desperation. The case began to draw comparisons to other famous disappearances. Clara was called Canada's Madeleine McCann in one op-ed. Her photo became a symbol, a reminder that horror didn't just live in crime dramas or foreign headlines. It could happen at your neighborhood fair. But weeks turned into months. Summer ended. The leaves changed, and Clara's yellow dress, once so vibrant on the posters, began to fade with the sunlight. Eventually, the national headlines moved on. But Truro didn't, and neither did the Wexleys. Martha began walking the fairgrounds every week, retracing their steps. Every balloon vendor, every ride, every bench. Over and over, because she believed deeply, fully, that someone knew something. And that somewhere, Clara was still alive. As the weeks wore on, Clara's name slowly slipped from the front pages. But not from Truro. In August of 2004, almost 2 months after her disappearance, a tip came in from a woman who ran a roadside diner off Highway 102. She claimed a man had entered the diner with a young girl who looked scared and unusually quiet. She didn't speak, the woman said, just stared at the table, like she wasn't really there. The girl was wearing a plain blue dress. Her hair was darker than Clara's school photos, but her eyes were unforgettable. The man paid in cash and left no name. Surveillance cameras at the diner weren't working that week due to a storm. The waitress described the man as mid-30s, beard, sunglasses, baseball cap. Not much to go on. Still, it was the most compelling tip they'd received. Police released a sketch based on the waitress's description and reopened the search area, focusing on truck stops, rest areas, and gas stations along major routes out of Nova Scotia. But just like every other lead, it led to a dead end. By September, Clara's case had entered what investigators quietly referred to as the holding phase. The evidence had dried up, public interest had moved on, and the investigative team was reassigned, leaving a single detective, Elise Monroe, to keep the file active. Monroe, a 42-year-old seasoned officer, known for her persistence, visited the Wexleys once a month. She never made promises, but she never gave up either. Meanwhile, Clara's parents were slowly crumbling beneath the surface. Paul tried to keep himself busy painting the fence, fixing things that didn't need fixing. Martha turned inward. Her days blurred together, marked only by Clara's absence. She started attending a support group for parents of missing children in Halifax. There, she met others with the same hollow eyes, the same constant loop of what if and why, her. The group helped, but only slightly. Because every time the phone rang, every time the doorbell echoed, hope came rushing back, followed closely by heartbreak. On what would have been Clara's 8th birthday, Martha baked a small cake. She lit a single candle. She didn't sing. She didn't speak. She just stared at the flame until it flickered out on its own. That fall, the Wexleys received a strange letter in their mailbox. It was unsigned, typed, no return address. It read, "She's not far. But you'll never find her if you keep looking in the light." The RCMP took it seriously. The paper was tested for fingerprints, none found. The envelope was traced standard stock, no distinguishing marks. The ink, basic office printer ink. In other words, nothing useful. Was it a cruel prank, a threat, a clue? No one knew. But it marked the last real moment of activity in Clara's case for a very long time. After that, everything went quiet. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, first in the way the phone stopped ringing, then in how fewer people mentioned Clara's name. News coverage became rare, the community vigils less attended. Even Detective Monroe stopped her monthly visits, replaced by brief, occasional emails. No updates. Still open, still looking. For the Wexleys, life became something else entirely. It wasn't living, not really. It was waiting in disguise. 5 years passed. Then 10. The milestones that marked time for most people: birthdays, school graduations, holidays were just empty rituals for Martha and Paul. They left Clara's room untouched. Her toothbrush sat in the cup. Her backpack still leaned against the hallway wall. Her shoes, now far too small, remained neatly lined by the door. Occasionally, tips still arrived. A woman in New Brunswick claimed she saw a teenager with hazel eyes and a limp being pulled into a car. Police followed up. It wasn't Clara. A psychic from Ontario sent a letter saying Clara was near water and surrounded by trees. That was the last straw for Paul. He ripped the letter in half and refused to speak of it. Martha, however, clung to every hint, no matter how outlandish. She joined forums, subscribed to missing persons databases, and spent long hours on Reddit boards and Facebook groups for cold cases. She even contacted a group that specialized in facial age progression, hoping to see what Clara might look like at 15, then 18, then 21. The image they created haunted her. It was Clara but older, a version that had lived all those years they hadn't. It brought her both hope and heartbreak. In 2016, a journalist from Vancouver reached out to do a podcast episode on long-unsolved Canadian disappearances. The Wexleys agreed. The episode brought a small wave of renewed attention, downloads, shares, even a few new tips. But again, nothing concrete. The podcast episode ended with a recording of Martha saying quietly, "I don't need justice. I just want to know if she still looks up at the stars." Then, in 2019, something strange happened. A man in Winnipeg was arrested for unrelated charges. And during the search of his property, police found several belongings that didn't match any known victims. Among them, a child's red sneaker with faded stitching and initials written inside in marker, CW. It matched the type of shoe Clara had been wearing the day she disappeared. The Wexleys were contacted immediately. The sneaker was flown to Halifax for analysis. DNA tests were conducted. The results, inconclusive. The shoe had been exposed to years of weather. The marker was too faded. No usable DNA remained. It could have been Clara's or just a coincidence. No other evidence tied the man to the case. Once again, the thread unraveled into nothing. For the Wexleys, hope had become a kind of ghost. It never left, but it stopped showing its face. Until the flyer arrived. By 2022, the Wexleys had all but disappeared from the public eye. They no longer spoke to reporters. They rarely left the house except for groceries or church on Sundays. Martha still checked the mailbox every day, not just for letters, but for something else. Something she couldn't quite name. She once told a friend, "I don't know what I'm waiting for, but I'll know it when I see it." And she did. It happened in the least expected way. Not through police work, not through investigation, but through faith. Martha had started attending online sermons during the pandemic, watching services from churches across the country. One morning, while browsing the website of a small church in British Columbia, she came across a digital flyer for an upcoming women's retreat. She nearly scrolled past it, then she stopped. There was a photo on the flyer, a close-up portrait of a woman in her 20s. Her name was not listed, just a generic title. "Join us in sisterhood and reflection." But something about the eyes, wide-set golden hazel with a calm intensity. Martha's hands began to shake. She leaned in closer to the screen, took a screenshot, opened her folder of Clara's photos, pulled up the school portrait, the one in the yellow dress. Side by side, the resemblance was uncanny. It wasn't just the eyes, it was the shape of the jaw, the arch of the left eyebrow, the quiet strength behind the gaze. Martha didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she emailed the church. No response, so she called, left a voicemail, then another. 3 days later, a church secretary named Janine finally called her back. She said the woman on the flyer was one of the retreat speakers, but she hadn't registered under her real name. She had come to the church a year earlier, asking for spiritual guidance. She didn't talk much about her past. She's kind, Janine said, quiet, gentle. But there's something sad in her. Martha didn't push. She simply asked, "Is she coming to the retreat?" "Yes," Janine replied. "She'll be here next week." Martha hung up the phone and called Detective Monroe. She hadn't spoken to her in years. "I think I found Clara," she whispered. Within hours, the cold case team was activated. Monroe contacted the church discreetly. She asked for the flyer. She asked for any digital information they had. Then she reached out to a forensic imaging expert who compared the church photo to Clara's last known images. The initial analysis returned one sentence: high likelihood of facial structure match, with unique ocular alignment consistent with childhood photo. But that wasn't enough. They needed to be sure. So Detective Monroe booked a flight to British Columbia. She wasn't going to send a junior officer or make a cold call. If this was really Clara Wexley, she was going to look her in the eyes herself. Detective Elise Monroe arrived in British Columbia 2 days before the retreat was scheduled to begin. She stayed in a modest hotel near the church, avoiding attention. This wasn't an arrest, and it wasn't a media event. It was delicate. After 2 decades, a young woman might be living under a different identity with no memory of the past, or with memories too painful to speak aloud. Monroe met with the church staff in private. She explained the situation carefully, calmly. The pastor, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, was shaken. "She's special to this community," he said. "She volunteers with children, teaches Sunday school. Whatever happened in her past, she's been trying to live quietly." The woman now went by the name Emma Caldwell. No ID had ever been shown to church leadership. No driver's license. No birth certificate. Just the name Emma and a smile that carried more weight than anyone knew what to do with. Monroe requested to speak with her directly, but not as law enforcement. She asked that it be informal, a meeting, not an interrogation. The church agreed to arrange it. Emma was told someone wanted to meet with her about volunteer opportunities related to child safety and awareness. She agreed without hesitation. The next morning, Monroe sat in a quiet corner of the church's library. The air smelled of old books and lavender oil, and then, the door opened. Emma stepped in. She looked just like the photo, but, more than that, she looked like a memory brought to life. She was composed, soft-spoken, curious, not afraid. Monroe introduced herself without flashing a badge. She mentioned she worked with families of missing children. Emma's expression shifted just slightly, a flicker, then calm again. They spoke for nearly an hour. About community programs, about Emma's involvement with the church. Monroe subtly steered the conversation toward childhood. Emma said she didn't remember much before the age of 9, just bits and pieces. She said, a blue blanket, a dog, a carnival ride, maybe, the carnival. Monroe froze for a fraction of a second, then asked, "Do you know the name Clara Wexley?" Emma blinked. "No, should I?" Monroe pulled out a laminated flyer from 2004, one of the original missing child posters. She placed it gently on the table. Emma leaned in, and something shifted in her face. Her breathing changed. Her hands trembled. "I don't remember her," she said. But Monroe wasn't convinced. That night, Monroe called the Wexleys. She told them she needed one more meeting, one more step. If Emma was willing, she would agree to a voluntary DNA swab. To everyone's surprise, she did. "I don't know why," Emma said softly, "but something tells me I need to know who I really am." The sample was collected, shipped, fast-tracked through the lab. All that was left to do was wait. The DNA results arrived 4 days later. Detective Monroe was sitting at her desk back in Halifax when the lab called. The technician on the line didn't bother with suspense. "It's her," he said, 99.98% parent-child match. "You found Clara Wexley." For a moment, Monroe didn't breathe. 20 years of dead ends, false hopes, and silence, and now in black and white, the truth had returned. She didn't call the Wexleys right away. Instead, she called Emma. They met in a quiet park near the church. Emma brought 2 cups of tea and a blanket. She had no idea what was coming. Monroe sat beside her, the paper in hand. "Your real name," she said gently, "is Clara Wexley. You disappeared from a fairground in Nova Scotia when you were 7 years old." Emma didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the trees, eyes wide but unreadable. "I always knew something was missing," she said after a long silence. "I didn't know what. I thought maybe I was adopted, or abandoned." Monroe asked if she remembered anything. A man, a house, a place, anything at all. Fragments emerged: a camper van, a swing set with rusted chains, a man with a beard who made her call him Uncle Jay. He wasn't violent at least not at first, but he was strict. Isolated, they moved constantly across provinces, through small towns, always staying under the radar. He homeschooled her, gave her a new name, and told her she had no family, that no one wanted her, that he had rescued her. At age 9, they lived in a cabin in northern Alberta. By 12, they were in the Yukon. When she was 16, he died of a heart attack while hiking. She was alone. No papers, no history. She chose the name Emma Caldwell because it sounded soft, safe. She stayed off the grid, worked at farms, churches, community centers. Never stayed long, never trusted fully, until now. Monroe offered to fly her to Nova Scotia, but Emma hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for them," she said. "They're ready for you," Monroe replied. "They never stopped being your parents." Emma didn't answer, but she took the envelope with the DNA results and tucked it into her coat. Back in Truro, Monroe visited the Wexleys in person. When Martha opened the door and saw the look on the detective's face, she didn't need words. She collapsed into Paul's arms. "She's alive," Monroe said, barely holding back her own tears. "And she remembers more than she thinks." Martha whispered, "I always knew her eyes would find their way back to us." Plans were made, calls exchanged, but no reunion just yet. Emma wanted time. Time to remember. Time to understand who she was before she became someone else. But she made one promise. "Tell them I'm real. Tell them I'm not lost anymore." With the DNA results confirmed and Emma Claire slowly piecing her past together, Detective Monroe reactivated the full cold case team. There were still unanswered questions. Who was the man that took her? How did he do it? Why? Emma agreed to work with a trauma therapist and a forensic psychologist to help unlock buried memories. What emerged over the following weeks was as disturbing as it was illuminating. His name was Jason Heller. He had no criminal record, no fingerprints in any national system, and had lived under at least 6 aliases over 2 decades. He was a drifter, a former carnival worker who traveled with seasonal fairs across Canada in the early 2000s. His work history placed him in Truro in June 2004, the exact time and place of Clara's disappearance. He'd worked briefly as a maintenance helper at the county harvest fair. He wasn't on the official payroll. He was paid cash by a third-party contractor. No one remembered much about him. Just a quiet man with tools and a beat-up camper van. According to Emma's memories, it happened in seconds. She remembered standing near a balloon stand. Her mother's hand had slipped away. She was looking at the bright colors, distracted. That's when Jason knelt beside her and said, "Your mom told me to bring you to her. She's waiting by the rides." She didn't question it. He took her hand and led her away from the crowd, past a maintenance gate near the back of the fairgrounds. There were no cameras, no guards, no one saw. By the time Martha turned around, Clara was already in the van. Jason drove 4 hours, deep into rural Nova Scotia, then west. He changed his plates twice, disposed of Clara's clothes and belongings, burned the dress, cut her hair, told her she was his niece. Her name was now Emma. He lived off the grid. No taxes, no online presence, cash jobs, seasonal work, homeschooling that left gaps and invented facts. But he wasn't physically abusive, at least not in the traditional sense. It was control through manipulation and fear. Clara, confused and isolated, began to believe what he told her, that her real parents had abandoned her, that no one was looking, that he had saved her. When he died of a sudden heart attack in the Yukon, she was 16. He collapsed while chopping wood. Clara didn't call anyone. She buried him herself. Then she ran. She lived in shelters, took odd jobs, changed names when needed. Eventually, she found the church in British Columbia. It gave her peace, but never answers. Until now, the RCMP officially closed the kidnapping case of Clara Wexley in May 2024. Jason Heller's name was added posthumously to a short list of Canada's most elusive child abductors. His motives remain unclear. There were no other known victims. No notes, no journals. But for Martha and Paul Wexley, one thing mattered above all. Clara had survived. And she had come back not as a little girl, but as a woman who had lived 2 lives and somehow found her way home. The reunion didn't happen in front of cameras. There were no news vans, no microphones, no staged hugs for headlines. Just a quiet Sunday morning in late June 2024. Exactly 20 years and 9 days after Clara Wexley vanished from the county harvest fair. The Wexleys waited outside their home, side by side on the porch swing where Martha had spent so many nights watching the stars. A car pulled up. Emma Clara stepped out. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward them, slowly, unsure. Paul stood first, then Martha. No one spoke. Clara reached into her coat and pulled out a worn photo, her school portrait from 2004, the one in the yellow dress. She held it out like a peace offering, or a bridge across time. Martha took it in, shaking hands. Then she wrapped her daughter in her arms and whispered, "You made it home." They stood like that for a long time. 3 people, broken and rebuilt, standing under the same sky that had watched them grieve for 20 years. Clara stayed with them for a week at first, then a month. The house hadn't changed much. Her room, still painted soft blue, was frozen in Timex. Now it smelled of fresh linens and second chances. She asked questions, lots of them. What was she like as a child? What was her favorite toy? Did she really sing to the dog every night like Martha claimed? She also shared her own memories. Some painful, some vague, but all real. The community welcomed her back cautiously at first. After all, how do you speak to someone who has lived in the shadows of your town's greatest heartbreak? But Clara surprised everyone. She didn't hide. She joined a support group for adult survivors of abduction. She gave a talk at the local school, gently educating young students on safety, trust, and healing. She started using both names Clara and Emma's, if honoring both versions of herself. The fairground where she vanished was later turned into a memorial park. At its center stands a sculpture, two hands reaching for one another across empty space. On the plaque, for simple words, she found her way. The Wexleys no longer live in fear, but they do live with scars. And Clara, she lives with the echoes of years lost, but also the power of a story that refuses to end in silence. Her case is now taught in police academies across Canada as an example of why cold cases should never be closed entirely. One flyer, one photo, one set of eyes, can change everything. And every now and then, Martha still receives letters from parents of missing children. She reads each one, and she always writes back the same line: never stop looking. They might be looking for you too.